Hey everyone, Dan Oddie here, Engineering and Technical Sales for Detroit Speed, and today we're going to show you how to install the Detroit Speed track bar kit on the 1979 to 93 Ford Fox Body Mustang, as well as the 1979 to 86 Mercury Capri applications. The Detroit Speed track bar uses modern cross-axis pivot bushings. Now each track bar bracket has two mounting holes so that you can keep your track bar level depending on your ride height of your vehicle. Now this kit can be used with the full Detroit Speed kit or with your factory suspension. Now product engineer Blake Tomlinson is going to show us how to get it installed. On a smooth level surface, block both sides of the rear tires. Loosen the rear lug nuts and jack up the front and then the rear of the vehicle. Support the car in the front and the rear by securely placing jack stands under the frame so the car is sitting level. Remove the rear wheels and tires. Place two jack stands securely under the rear axle tubes. If your vehicle is equipped with a factory or aftermarket sway bar, remove the two sway bar bolts located in the lower trailing link, or remove the sway bar end links on both sides of the vehicle. If you have an 84 to 93 vehicle, remove the quad shocks from the vehicle. Remove the shocks from the rear axle by removing the lower shock bolts from the rear axle brackets. Using a floor jack, raise the rear axle off the jack stands. Remove the jack stands and lower the rear axle so it is in full droop. You will need to drop the rear exhaust. Spray penetrant fluid on the bolts. Remove the exhaust at the flanges in front of the rear axle. Spray penetrant fluid on the exhaust hanger isolators. Pry the isolators off the body side hangers near the front of the upper trailing arm and at the back by the exhaust tips on both sides of the vehicle. Let the exhaust sit on top of the rear axle. If you have an 84 to 93 vehicle, remove the quad shock frame rail mounts by removing the two bolts on each side of the vehicle. Remove the interior plastic cover behind the back seat to gain access to the upper shock mount nut. Remove the nut with an impact wrench on both sides of the vehicle. Remove the shocks from the vehicle. Remove the fuel filter bracket from the vehicle. Remove the fuel filter from the bracket. Use a cutoff wheel to trim a section of the top flange of the mounting bracket. Cut to the other side of the stamp feature and then cut away at a 45-degree angle. Reinstall the fuel filter back into the bracket and back into the vehicle. Drill out the pop rivet in the clamp holding the fuel line in place on the inboard side of the passenger frame rail. Carefully pull the fuel line away from the frame rail. Using a straight edge, mark a location at the bottom of the upper shock mounting flange 5/8 off the frame rail. Then, mark a location at the top of the upper shock mounting flange a 1/2 inch off the frame rail. Draw a vertical line in the flange connecting the two marked locations. Using a cutoff wheel or an air saw, remove the section that was marked in the previous step between the upper shock mount flange and the frame rail. Repeat this process for the opposite side of the vehicle. Position the track bar frame rail brace assembly onto the frame rail. Make sure that the fuel lines are located underneath the track bar brace. Also make sure the outboard frame rail bracket fits the upper shock mount flange in the frame rail that was modified in the previous step. Bend the upper shock mount flange back so it's no longer in the way of the middle mounting hole on the track bar frame rail brace. The flange should be bent back at about a 45-degree angle. If you have an 84 to 93 vehicle, you can use the provided M12 by 30 button head screw and M12 washer to locate the body side bracket to the frame rail. Tighten the M12 button head screw to the frame rail. Transfer punch the 3 hole locations on the bottom side of the track bar frame rail brace assembly onto the bottom side of the frame rail. Since the holes are slotted, you will need to transfer punch your hole locations so they are centered on the hole center line of the large fixture hole. Remove the track bar frame rail brace from the frame rail. Drill the 3 holes marked on the bottom side of the frame rail using an 11/32 drill bit. Then drill out only the hole closest to the rear bumper using a 15/32 drill bit. It is recommended that pilot holes be drilled first before drilling the 11/32 and 15/32 holes. Install one of the provided 5/16 18 by 1 inch hex head bolts into the provided single frame rail well nut doubler plate. Wrap the threads of the 5/16 bolt with masking tape. Place the threads of the bolt into the 11/32 drilled hole on the bottom side of the frame rail closest to the front of the vehicle. Make sure the small hole is pointed towards the front of the vehicle and transfer punch the small hole on the nut plate to the bottom side of the frame rail. Install one of the provided 5/16 18 by 1 inch and one of the 7/16 20 by 1 inch hex head bolts into the double frame rail weld nut doubler plate. Wrap the threads of the bolts with masking tape. Place the threads of the bolts into the drilled holes on the bottom side of the frame rail closest to the rear of the vehicle. Transfer punch the small hole on the nut plate to the bottom side of the frame rail. Drill the 2 holes marked on the bottom side of the frame rail from the previous steps using a 5/32 drill bit. It is recommended that pilot holes be drilled first before drilling the 5/32 holes. Chamfer the holes using a large drill bit or chamfer tool until the provided 8/32 by 1/2 inch flathead screw sits flush with the frame. In order to install the frame rail nut doubler plates, you can pull them through the lower link hole in the frame by looping wire through the nut plates and pulling them up to the mounting location in the frame. A magnet can also be helpful to line up the nut plate assemblies. You can use the 5/16 18 and 7/16 20 hardware to help hold the weld nut plates in place while you install the 8/32 flathead screws. Use medium strength blue Loctite on the threads of the screws and tighten. Install both weld nut plates assemblies into the frame rail and remove the wire. Position the track bar frame rail brace assembly back around the frame rail. Install 2 of the provided 5/16 18 by 1 inch hex head bolts and 5/16 AN washers and one of the 7/16 20 by 1 inch hex head bolt and 7/16 washer through the bottom side of the bracket, through the frame rail, and into the single and double weld nut doubler plates. Install the M12 by 30 button head screw with M12 washer into the outboard side of the frame rail if you are installing this kit on an 84 to 93 vehicle. Use medium strength blue Loctite on the threads of the bolts and tighten. For earlier vehicles, these bolt holes and fasteners will not be used. Drill 2 holes through the outboard side only of the frame rail. Use the 2 3/4 inch holes on the outboard side of the track bar frame rail brace assembly as a guide using a 3/4 inch hole saw. You can also use a 3/4 inch rotor broach for this step. Chamfer the holes as needed. Be sure to keep the drill perpendicular to the frame rail as you will be installing crush sleeves through the frame rail. Place 2 of the provided frame rail crush sleeves into the drilled holes from the previous step. Place a 1/2 inch drill bit in the crush sleeves and spot drill the inner frame rail at both locations. Remove the crush sleeves from the frame rail. Use the provided 1/8 inch extended drill bit and locate the center of the spot drill location on the inner frame rail from the previous step. Drill through these locations using a 1/2 inch drill bit. It is recommended that pilot holes be drilled first before drilling the 1/2 inch holes. Place the crush sleeves back in the track bar frame rail brace and frame rail. Install one of the provided 1/2 inch 20 by 3 3/4 inch long hex head bolt and washer through the crush sleeve towards the front of the vehicle. Place the right hand track bar shock tower reinforcement bracket so it sits against the upper shock mount flange in the track bar frame rail brace assembly. Adjust the factory flange as needed to fit the reinforcement bracket. Install the other 1/2 inch 20 by 3 3/4 inch hex head bolt and washer through the reinforcement bracket, track bar frame rail brace, and frame rail at the rearward crush sleeve. Install the provided 1/2 inch 20 nylock nuts and washers onto the bolts on the inboard side of the brackets and tighten. Using the track bar reinforcement bracket as a template, center punch and drill 2 5/16 mounting hole locations through the factory upper shock mount flange. Install 2 of the provided 5/16 18 by 3 1/4 inch hex head bolts, nylock nuts, and washers through the upper shock mount flange and reinforcement bracket. Tighten the 5/16 hardware. Repeat this process for the opposite side of the vehicle. Carefully reshape the fuel line on the inside of the passenger side so the clamp can be reinstalled to the frame rail. Place the provided 1/4 inch by 1 inch self-tapping screw through the fuel line clamp and into the hole in the frame rail. Tighten the screw so it holds the clamp in place. Install the track bar brace assembly onto the body side track bar mount assembly. Make sure the brace fits around the outside of the body side track bar mount on the driver's side. Install one of the provided M14 by 80 mm flange head bolt to hold the brace in place. The body side track bar mount assembly has 2 holes separated by 3/4 inch for your adjustability. The lower hole in the bracket is nominal for stock ride height. As you lower your ride height from stock, you may want to use the upper hole in the body side track bar mount assembly. Position the end of the track bar brace with the 2 slotted holes to the track bar frame rail brace assembly on the passenger side. Place the provided track bar brace weld nut doubler plate assembly on the top side of the frame rail brace on the passenger side. You may want to run a 7/16 tap through the nut plate to make sure the threads are clean for the fasteners. Install 2 of the provided 7/16 by 1 inch hex head bolts and washers into the weld nut doubler plate. Tighten these bolts, however do not torque them at this point. Carefully adjust the fuel lines by hand so they have clearance around the track bar frame rail brace assembly on the passenger side. Prepare the passenger side of the rear axle tube for the rear axle side track bar mount assembly by carefully adjusting the brake line away from the axle tube. Place the axle side track bar mount assembly around the back side of the axle tube so that the bottom surface of the bracket is parallel with the ground. The passenger side of the track bar will drop down into the top side of the bracket. Install the provided 7/16 by 4.5 inch U-bolts from the front side of the axle tube and into the axle side track bar mount. Install the provided 7/16 nylock nuts and washers onto the U-bolts. Tighten the hardware so the U-bolts are tightened evenly. Leave the track bar mount loose so it can be adjusted later. Position the track bar so it sits in the pocket of the axle side track bar mount. Raise the rear axle and place jack stands underneath the rear axle tubes so the rear axle is at your desired ride height. Use a smart level to adjust the axle side track bar mount so that the bottom side is parallel with the ground. Adjust the axle side track bar mount on the rear axle tube so the mounting hole in the track bar lines up with the mounting holes in the track bar mount. The track bar length has been preset and the jam nuts torqued during the assembly process at Detroit speed. Install the provided M14 by 80 mm flanged hex head bolt through the track bar mount and track bar bushing. The top hole in the bracket is nominal for stock ride height. As you lower your ride height from stock, you may want to use a lower hole in the track bar frame rail brace assembly. The track bar should be as close to level as possible when at ride height. Once the M14 hex head bolts are installed in the track bar, tighten the axle side track bar mount to the axle tube. Verify that the bottom side of the track bar mount remains parallel with the ground while you tighten the U-bolts. Torque the U-bolts to 45 foot-pounds. Install the provided M14 flange lock hex nut on both M14 hex head bolts installed in the track bar and tighten. Torque the 2 7/16 fasteners in the track bar brace to the weld nut doubler plate in the track bar frame rail brace assembly channel to 40 foot-pounds. Refer to the instructions to complete the track bar kit installation. Now that you've got your kit installed, you've corrected the geometry, you've lowered the stance, and improved your handling performance. If you have any questions on suspension tune-up, please call us at 704-662-3272. You can also send us an email at tech@detroitspeed.com. Feel free to visit our website at detroitspeed.com or any of our social media outlets.